welcome to part 2, video lesson 2 of your ednextonline.org Cambridge IGCSE and O-Level Literature and English course. If you have not already watched video lesson 1, please make sure to do that before you proceed onto this video. In the part 1 video lesson 1, we covered units 1 through 3 of the official textbook material for this exam. Again, if you don't have them in front of you, make sure you have your course book as well as your workbook in front of you. For today, we will be working in the course book, but it is important that as needed, you can pause the video and go and do some exercises. The intention is not that you watch this video from start to finish and then go and do your work. You should come back and watch different parts of this video as needed. It is also recommended that you could watch it before and/or after completing all of the assignments in its entirety. So what you can do, and what I suggest you do, is to first read through the chapter, skim the chapter. Look at what the headlines are, what the important information is, and what you will be learning. And then you can go ahead and read as you watch the video. I don't recommend doing it in one sitting though, unless you want to first watch the whole video and then go back and watch it in small parts. You can do that, and I do recommend that if you learn well that way. It is important that you learn in more than one way though, and that you do not rely solely on these video lessons, as they are only supplementary to your active learning process. If you don't know how to active learn, make sure to go back and read units 1 through 3 in the book and to watch video lesson 1, where we covered some tactics of how you could learn to do that. Of course, you need to also complete all of the exercises in both the course book and the workbook in order to learn how to do that. Additionally, make sure that you submit the assignment 1 from part 1 of the course online at ednextonline.org in the Moodle online area. It is important that you submit your work there so that you can get some written feedback from me. As always, if you have any questions regarding the material, then make sure to upload the questions in the question section in the online area of the course. If you are watching this video and you are not enrolled in the course, check out ednextonline.org and check when you can possibly enroll and when the next possible start date is for you to enroll in one of these courses. Okay, just to refresh, what units are we covering in part 2? We covered units 1 and 2 in the first video, as well as unit 3. We are now covering units 4, 5, and 6 from part 2 of our course book. Be sure that you check out the supplementary learning material folder in the online area of your Moodle course at ednextonline.org. There we have additional work for you, such as worksheets or PowerPoint slides, and there may even be additional video content from me for you there as well. So be sure to check that out and to complete all of those exercises. Please be active in the discussion forum, comment on each other's work, and you will sometimes get some feedback from me as well. The work that I see in the discussion forum will be discussed in the live stream lesson, and also you can ask questions in the live streams as well. Your answers, though, will be clearer and more effective, more useful, if I have them in advance. So be sure to ask any concrete questions in the question section of the part of the course where you have the question. Please open your course book now to page 19, Unit 4, Reading for Meaning. It will look like this. The learning outcomes for this course are as follows. Read closely a range of poems. Use a range of active learning strategies. Use relevant terminology appropriately when responding to poems. And gain confidence in communicating a personal response to poems. The Personal response and active learning strategies are definitely the most important parts of this unit and are absolutely essential for you to learn in order to succeed in your Cambridge exams. Make note of the key term, the green box. Strategies is the first key term of this unit. Strategies means the approaches you use when studying texts effectively. This coursebook will suggest strategies to help you as you study your literature texts. Throughout your book, you also have tips, not just key terms in green, but you also have purple outlined boxes with an exclamation point that says tips. Your first tip in this unit is on page 20. This is an important tip that you need to remember, so I'm going to read it out loud for you. When reading poetry, pause at the ends of lines only where there is punctuation, such as a comma or a full stop. This is important whether you are reading silently or aloud. It would be a mistake to pause at the end of each line of a poem, which is what some students do. Such an approach would get in the way of understanding what the poet has to say. So it is important that you read in that way, and I also advise that whenever possible, you try to read the poems out loud so you can experience it and understand it on a deeper level. Please pause the video to review the green box with the key terms theme, universal theme, and rhyme. This unit starts off with some tips about how to read a poem closely. Do not absent-mindedly read the poem. Read it closely and remember these two things. Focus on the content, so what the poem is about, and focus on the words and the sounds the poet uses to convey this message. For example, how the poet is communicating the ideas that they are presenting in the poem. Unit 4.1 starts off with the poem Afternoons by Philip Larkin. If you haven't already, pause the video then and read through this poem. Again, my tip, read it out loud and make sure that you don't pause at the end of every line, but simply where there is punctuation. At the bottom of page 21, you will see the tip to make sure there are no distractions as you are studying. It is important to study with complete silence. Make sure that your phone is nowhere within reach. What you can do is put it on the other side of the room. You can set an alarm if you need to be done at a certain time. Then do that, but make sure that it is not within reach and in a place where it will distract you from reading. Poetry must be really all-consuming. You must read it with silence and with your full focus. If you normally study with music on, I don't recommend doing that when reading poetry. Make sure that you turn any music off. The tip and activities 1 and 2 on page 22 are extremely important. You may be tempted to simply skip over this, making glossaries or vocabulary word lists. Why should you make sure that you don't skip over this section? Let me tell you. If you have a long list of words that you do not know, and you attempt to then go back and study it after you've read all of the texts and you try to prepare for writing the actual exams without taking the words part by part, chunk by chunk, you will probably not succeed, and you will, even if you succeed, be making it a lot harder for yourself. So as you come across words you don't know, enter them into your own personal glossary or vocabulary word list where you use, as the examples show you, different columns, and you break it down in a way that you can understand them and go back to them easily. Even if you don't review these words often and you don't study them for hours on end, simply the process of making such a glossary or vocabulary word list is that it will help you learn the word better because you've gone through the process of making this glossary. As you continue further, it is important to remember that you must do these activities and not simply read them. These activities tell you two things: what to look for in a poem and what to say about a poem. You cannot simply make something up and say something surface level. They will not give you a good mark if you do that, so it is important that you learn how to analyze the poetry accordingly. Activity 3 is definitely a good one for you guys on page 23. That is where you break down the poems stanza by stanza. I almost recommend doing this one before activity 1 where you learn to summarize, but it depends on your learning preference. It is sometimes easier to summarize once you've broken it down into smaller pieces, but each and every one of these activities is important for you. If you struggle with one, it may be good to move on to another activity and continue working further, and then go back to the previous activity that you struggled with. In this way, you can learn and you have more information and you have a different perspective as well. When reading poems, think about the 3 questions that are listed on page 22. Question 1. What does the poem have to say? Question 2. How does the poet make deliberate choices about the words they use to create certain effects that help to communicate their ideas? Question 3. How does the poet make deliberate choices about the way they organize their ideas in the most effective order? This is helpful for you before you read a poem to read through these questions first and then to answer the questions after reading it, and that will help you write a summary and to assess and analyze the poem that you have just read. Continue further with the activities in this unit and make sure not to skip over any. At the end of unit on page 31, you will see that there is a progress check and a self-evaluation. This is essential for you, and even though it is not part of your assignment that you need to submit for this part of the course, I do ask and strongly recommend that you upload this to the discussion forum so I can better answer your questions from the question section, and then I can better help you and give you feedback on the assignments that you are required to submit. Now I want to point out 2 different sections before we move on to the next unit. I want to mention a special author, Syvia Plath. As an American, maybe I am biased, and as a woman, maybe I am extra biased, but she is a very famous American author. Make sure to check out the video that I'm going to upload for you guys on Syvia Plath, her life and her works and her biography. She was married to another author, a poet, that I made a video about, the poem Wind, that is by Ted Hughes. They were formerly married. You may notice some common themes amongst the poets here in this unit. If you look at the poem by Larkin called Afternoons, and you look at the poem Mirror by Plath, you will see the similar theme of the passing of time. You should definitely take some time to reflect on this theme and to look at how the different authors approach it in their poems. Let's read Syvia Plath's poem Mirror on page 25 of your coursebook. Pause this video and read through it. Again, try to read it out loud if at all possible. And make sure that you pause at the places where there's punctuation rather than at the end of every line. Okay, now I will read through it for you. Mirror. I am silver and exact. I have no preconceptions. Whatever I see, I swallow immediately just as it is, unmisted by love or dislike. I am not cruel, only truthful, the eye of a little god, four-cornered. Most of the time I meditate on the opposite wall. It is pink with speckles. I have looked at it for so long I think it is a part of my heart, but it flickers. Faces and darkness separate us over and over. Now I am a lake. A woman bends over me, searching my reaches for what she really is. Then she turns to those liars, the candles or the moon. I see her back and reflect it faithfully. She rewards me with tears and an agitation of hands. I am important to her. She comes and goes. Each morning it is her face that replaces the darkness. In me she has drowned a young girl, and in me an old woman rises toward her day after day like a terrible fish. Wow, powerful, right? Okay, so let's complete activity 1 on page 25. Pause the video if you have not already done so, or if you need to go and get your notes. Okay, good. Did you complete it? If not, pause it and do it. Let's go through it together now. The word agitation here It means a state of worry or anxiety. The mirror clearly perceives the woman in the reflection as anxious and worried through her hand movements. The word meditate on means contemplate. The word faithfully means accurately in this context, which could throw non-native speakers off a bit because faithfully could have a different meaning as well. Here, the faithful reflection of the woman's back is faithful to the truth, rather than a person or a religious figure. Therefore, it means accurate. Preconceptions means ideas or opinions formed before all the information is available. Speckles means small spots. And unmisted means not clouded by. Be sure to complete all of the exercises and activities very closely in both your course book and your workbook. And again, I know I sound repetitive, but please upload your questions in the question section of the course, and please upload your work in the discussion forum and check out the work of your classmates. Be sure to comment on each other's work as well. Another tip about your glossary or vocabulary word list is that you try to find one true dictionary that you really like. I am personally a fan of Merriam-Webster, especially their telephone app. But you may get distracted if you are using a digital dictionary. If you can have a physical hard copy dictionary, that is ideal. It is also better to use a monolingual dictionary. That means English to English. You can use one that translates to your own language, your own native tongue, but words don't always translate properly, so it is almost better that you simply use the English to English one and that you see a description or definition in that manner instead of a translation to your own mother language. I will make sure to link some dictionary apps and websites in the description box of this video on my YouTube channel as well. Let's move on now to Unit 5. It begins on page 32 of your course book, and it is called Exploring Language and Structure. The first key term is imagery. This is an important key term. People often use this incorrectly or not effectively. It is a broad term that can refer to many different things, so you're not being very specific when you use the word imagery. Let's have a look at the green box that defines it. Imagery plays a central role in poetry. On a straightforward level, you can picture in your head the literal images created by the words in the poem. Other examples of imagery that poets use are not as literal, so they use them to communicate their ideas even more strikingly. Pause the video to read or reread the poem Blackberry Picking by Seamus Henry on page 33 of your course book. Pay close attention to the imagery in the poem, and you are advised, as always, to read it out loud. Hit pause and read. As we move on to activities 1 and 2 on page 34 and 35, it is very important to really dissect the imagery used in these poems. Make sure that if you're having trouble with the pronunciation of words, that you Google and use YouTube to hear some recordings of these poems, to hear how the sounds are when they pronounce these words. How do these words sound? This is extremely important to feeling the full effect of the imagery of each and every poem. Take a look at the green key term boxes on page 34 and 35. These words cover simile and onomatopoeia. I can never pronounce that word correctly, which is funny because it means words that sound the way that they actually mean. So for example, plop, plop. That sounds like the meaning of the word. These are really common tools that are used in poetry, and it is important that you reflect upon that in these two activities as is seen in the book. Before you move on to the next poem on pages 36 and 37, take a look at the photo of the daffodils and reflect on that before you read the poem. It will give you a different perspective. Daffodils by William Wordsworth is part of the romantic genre. This genre focuses on nature, beauty, and tranquility, and it is perfectly embodied in this poem. Reflect on the photo again after reading the poem, and really focus on the last stanza in the poem when you analyze it. Search for the deeper meaning here. As you do these activities and submit your work in the discussion forum, be sure to focus on two things: assonance, and rhyme scheme. If you don't know those terms, read your book again. You can find them as key terms in the green boxes on page 38 and 39. If you're not quite catching the understanding of this genre after completing all the activities, do the extension exercise on page 41. That is an introduction of sonnets. They start with none other than the great English writer, arguably the greatest English writer of all time, William Shakespeare. Sonnets are very traditional poems. They stick to a certain set structure, and they have a certain set rhyme as well. If you want to see a good contrast to the sonnets, then you can look at the more free style of the poet Walt Whitman, and you can study that later in the chapter, and you can compare and contrast the differences. If you're having trouble understanding rhyme and structure in poetry, especially in sonnets, then review the key terms turning point and link. Those can be found on page 42 before you complete the activities on page 43. From page 44, the unit really focuses more on free verse, and two very important terms are given here on page 44, so check those green boxes, pause the video to review them. We have two very important key terms here on page 44. As you read Come Up From the Field's Father by Walt Whitman, be sure to read it out loud and pause to write down the words that stand out to you before you go ahead and complete the exercises that follow. Moving forward onto page 48 of your course book, we have the poem Telephone Conversation by Wol Soyinka. Here you find the use of a dialogue with a narrator. Read the green box with the two key terms and also the bluish gray box that has the word link on it. This is important to do before you do the activities so you have a better understanding as you are trying to complete them. Remember that video that I made for you guys on the poem Wind by Ted Hughes? If not, go back and review that and try to find the connections between Ted Hughes's Wind to the poem here. Try to focus on being specific when you comment on the style of free verse. Vague answers won't get you a high mark. Before moving on to Unit 6, be sure to complete the progress check and self-evaluation on page 50. Let's move on now to Unit 6, Developing an Informed Personal Response to a Poem. In this unit, you will learn how to build on your first impressions of a poem, explore language and meaning closely, use evidence to support your own personal response, and practice writing skills needed to develop an informed personal response. Here we start this unit by reading To His Coy Mistress by Andrew Marvell, which was published in 1681. In Activity 1 on page 53, you are asked to read the poem carefully and write down your first impressions. While doing this, be sure to cite evidence from the poem to support your response. This is key. A key theme in this poem is time passing quickly. Where have we heard that one before? This seems to be a common theme in poetry. Be sure to also read the tip on page 53 regarding the different ways in which you refer to short poems, longer poems, short stories, and longer texts, and start applying those to both your handwritten assignments as well as your typed assignments. It is important that you understand the punctuation and the differences between these different forms of writing. And as always, don't forget to submit your work in the online area of the course so you can have some feedback from the other students and eventually from me as well. Moving on to pages 54 and 55, you have activities 2 through 7. These will provide the tools you need to break down this poem and to analyze it more critically, which will help you build a strong personal response. Check out the key term hyperbole. This means an exaggerated use of language for deliberate effect. And then go on and read on page 54 the meaning of the word images. This word is very broad. It is important that you know what it means. Please read the teacher comments to the student responses as well on page 56. This will really help you to better understand what makes a response either weak or strong, and that you can try to make sure your response is on the strong side. The next part of Unit 6 really focuses on the use of textual evidence. So actually backing up what you're trying to say, not making surface level broad claims, but actually using examples and evidence from the text to support your ideas. You go on next to look at the poem Row by Carol Ann Duffy as you complete activities 1 through 3. Here you practice the skills learned throughout all of part 2 of the course, the units that we have done thus far. Check out the tip on page 57 to learn how to look more closely at how writers use language and structure in poetry. And then we go on and we look at the poem, as we've already mentioned, Wind by Ted Hughes. If you haven't already, you can pause and watch the video I made on this poem. And make sure to, of course, read through it yourself, preferably out loud. Please make sure that you also look at the separate worksheet that we have in the supplementary learning material as well, so that you can get a fuller understanding of this poem and that you can more efficiently provide your answers to the activities in the book. And of course, as always, at the end, complete the progress check and self-evaluation, and please also upload it in the discussion area. It can be found for this unit on page 61. After that, give yourself a well-deserved break. You have just learned a lot about poetry. And if you have done this all in a short span of time, I recommend that you take a little break and go back and review the material again before moving on to part 3 of the course. There is a summary for part 2 of the course that can be found on page 62 of your course book. Complete all of the assignments in the online area. Make sure also in the workbook that you complete the pages that are listed there in the assignment section for part 2 of this course. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great time studying, and don't forget to submit your work online and to ask any questions you have there. Take care and see you again soon for part 3 of the course. Bye!